OCD is super misunderstood, right? It's one of the only terms in the English language which almost everyone recognizes and almost everyone also misunderstands. Like, it was misdiagnosed again and again about several different times. Intense anxiety was overwhelming, unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I literally went from the starting quarterback at my university, and 6 months later, I'm literally at rock bottom. And that was the point where, to me, it was like, okay, there's something seriously wrong here. Like, I got to figure this out. If I was to tell somebody who's just figuring out what they're going through as OCD some advice, what I'd share with them is that they can get better. People shouldn't have to suffer, especially if there's treatment for them.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Get To Know OCD podcast. I'm excited to be here with all of you. My name is Dr. Patrick McGrath. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. NOCD is an online platform for the treatment of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. If you're looking for help for OCD, check us out at nocd.com or treatmyocd.com. Today's guest is Stephen Smith, the CEO of NOCD and the founder of NOCD. Stephen, welcome. So glad to have you here today.
It's amazing to be here with you, Patrick, as always.
Not like we're not together daily on Zoom or something like that, but to be here in person is so fun.
Couldn't agree more.
As we're launching this podcast, I'd like to know kind of the why behind it. What's your vision for the Get To Know OCD podcast?
It's a great question. Personally, my vision for this podcast is to ensure that people who are suffering in silence can find resources quickly that can give them hope and that can allow them to get to treatment faster in their journey. Personally, that was always a challenge for me. Mm-hmm. Is obviously, as you know, my story. I was misdiagnosed quite a bit prior to getting evidence-based treatment, just simply because OCD is super misunderstood, right? It's one of the only terms in the English language which almost everyone recognizes and almost everyone also misunderstands. Yeah. So to have a podcast which allows someone to quickly understand OCD, to get to know it faster, could actually allow them to get to help faster then. And so our hope is that many people can watch this podcast throughout not just the US, but the world, so that people can ultimately get to help that they need earlier in their journey and then live a much, happier, I'd say, a happier life that's more focused on their life as opposed to OCD, right?
Right, like we say a lot, I want you to live the life you want to live and not the life your OCD wants you to live. That's a big piece of it. Exactly. Yeah. OCD can be so isolating. And so to get a message out through a podcast like this hopefully brings people, as you said, across the world together. How do you hope that people identify with what we'll be talking about in various episodes of the podcast?
I hope people can listen to the stories of the guests and really try to relate to what they're experiencing. Because I think what I've personally, when I was going through my experience with OCD, when people would describe the details of their story, like for instance, not just their OCD fears, but also their reactions socially to them. Like for instance, there were times where people would have a fear and then they would go to the grocery store and see someone and they would have like a very specific trigger and they'll have a very specific reaction to that trigger. And that, like those like details, those nuances are what allow people to say, wow, like that's exactly what I'm going through too. I just had that experience happen 2 weeks ago. And when you can have that level of relatability to a specific set of symptoms, I think it allows people to then actually feel hope that, hey, there's someone else out there going through the same thing. They're actually not alone, right? And that was actually in my journey probably one of the most pivotal moments.
How alone were you? Because before you even knew the term OCD, how alone did you feel as you started to experience symptoms?
Wow. Let me just kind of walk back and describe a little bit about what I went through first, and I can share with you how alone I felt.
That'd be great.
So prior to having my, I would say, severe onset of OCD, and the reason why I say severe onset is because I've always had OCD symptoms, right? Sure. When I was a child, I remember I had a very specific fear that I swallowed a pen cap and it was somewhere lodged in my throat. So I would literally stand in front of the mirror with a flashlight and trying to find this pen cap that was somewhere stuck in my throat, thinking that that's what was going on. Because I was just always checking to make sure I didn't have something stuck in my throat. And I knew it was kind of ridiculous, but I just didn't fully know if it was
Yeah.
with 100% certainty if there was actually a pen cap not in my throat. There could be one. So I started having like those types of fears. I would always also had a lot of health concern anxiety, or health anxiety as I was growing up. But I didn't really associate with OCD because I didn't know much about OCD. And then when I went to college, I played football at a small school down in Texas, played quarterback. Everything was going super well. I came off of a big year my sophomore year. It came home for summer break shortly after. And when I was home, I had a lot of stress. I was with my family, which is I'm one of 5 kids, as you know, my family, Patrick. Lots going on, but no, it's always a fun time, of course. But just different transition, and then also had a bunch of social stressors like my first long distance relationship and a few other things. And because of I think the buildup of all this stress, not just from like the status quo, but from school and sports, like it was a very stressful time too, playing football for a variety of reasons. I think that's what really that stress created an environment that fueled my OCD fears. In retrospect, I know stress can sometimes cause flare-ups, right? And so I started having the intrusive thoughts, like the hallmark symptoms. So OCD, people oftentimes think about it as a personality quirk, but it's defined by these intrusive thoughts, images, and urges that are unwanted, often ego dystonic, violating the person's core values and character. And to make those OCD thoughts those thoughts, images, and urges go away, people do very specific actions called compulsions. And those actions could be, actions that you see, and they also can be actions in your head, right? Things that you do to try to stop or neutralize the fear. And so I started having those symptoms on a relatively taboo topic about, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, so I tell her this all the time. And
she's lovely, by the way. Hello.
And so I started having those fears, and again, it made sense because it was the first long distance relationship, and I didn't know what to do, and so I had tremendous amounts of anxiety. Like again, like other fears, you can just let them transition in and out of your head. This one felt stuck. Like it was like you just could not logically disprove the fear, no matter how hard you tried. Like there was always something that you could say, well, if that happened, then this could happen. Then as a result, your fear could be true, right? And so, again, the intense anxiety was overwhelming, unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And I saw a provider in my area, a therapist who was a psychologist, who told me, what you're experiencing is just anxiety. For every time you have a thought, I want you to snap a rubber band on your wrist. And it made me worse. It wasn't just ineffective, it actually was harmful. And so I was misdiagnosed again and again about several different times after that one experience. Similar advice. One therapist told me, I want you to imagine a train running in your head, and every time a car passes, I want you to take one of your thoughts and place it in it and just watch it go on by. And I'm like, well, that's kind of strange, but let me try that out. And so
long train too, isn't it?
Long train,
really
long train, lots of thoughts, right? Lots of dark thoughts. And so and so then so that was going on, and then the next therapist said, yeah, just move away from your family. Like, it's
the standard move away from your family. Yes,
exactly. That's going to solve everything. So I'm like, all right, you may be right. So I packed my bags and went back down to school, and I was like, well, that's going to help. And in 2 months or 2 days later, it's like, I'm just back in the spiraling, right? The typical nonstop, intrusive thoughts, trying to, just disprove them in your head while showing to everyone else everything's okay, and doing all these compulsive actions like Google searching to try to disprove them. Like I did the full gamut. Themes would change probably once every 2 months or so, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yep.
And at that point, like I didn't realize this was OCD at the time. I just thought I was going off the rails. Like I had no direction of any sort. And that's what was most isolating. So I'm like, okay, I'm going through this horrific experience. I literally went from the starting quarterback at my university, and people thought I could be an All-American at one point if I just kept going on that trajectory. And 6 months later, I'm literally at rock bottom. Just couldn't even leave my room. And that was the point where, to me, it was like, okay, there's something seriously wrong here. Like, I got to figure this out. And when I was searching for help on Google, I saw that there are other people on a forum that were going through the exact same thing as me based off their story. Like, they were detailing their thoughts, detailing the reactions to them, detailing the social consequences, the way it affected their family members, like what they would do, like having, for instance, anniversaries for the time in which they had their first severe intrusive thought. Like they knew that exact day, and that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
So like I was relating to these very specific details of their story, and like also how they felt about these certain thoughts, and like what, just the overall stickiness of them. And I was like, wow, like that's exactly what I'm going through. And then they said, here's what this is. This is OCD. This is what I'm going through. And I'm like, well, I may be going through that too. I have no idea, but that sure sounds like, what I'm dealing with. So where do I go get help? And that was where the next leg of the journey started, right? Where I was like, okay, where I go get help is just as important now as just kind of figuring this out. But now I gotta figure out how to get help. And we've tried to make that a much easier at NOCD.
It's been the goal.
The goal over the last decade. And, fortunately, thanks to our team, lots of work, it's been a lot easier now, or it is a lot easier now for a lot of people. Again, we're not finished, of course, with our mission, but we have made progress, and there's more progress to be made. But that was my kind of point in which I was like, okay, I actually feel, much better that because of the fact that I know I'm not alone and there's people getting help. I haven't gotten help yet, and at this point in the journey, but I know I'm like on the right track,
right?
Not at kind of drifting off on my own island.
So at that point, you figure out what you have. You probably figure out there's a therapy for it. I'm sure those forums talk about that. How do you find it? What do you do at that point in your life?
So that's why I started Googling again. So I was a master Google searcher as having OCD, right? I was the guy who Google searched for reassurance and to check things and to better understand, just to again find that like golden piece of information that could disprove all of my OCD intrusive thoughts, which I still have yet to find.
No one has ever yet found it. Maybe it's out there if someone thinks, but we've never found it yet. Yeah.
And so my next step was where I go get help. So I was searching for treatment, learned that exposure and response prevention therapy and medication, is the gold standard for OCD. And so I was like, okay, well, that's great. This can be manageable. In fact, I learned that despite its severity, OCD is one of the most manageable, severe psychiatric conditions, just given ERP and medication's efficacy. And then I went to find a specialist, and that's where I ran into some challenges, right? There was one specialist in my area who did exposure response prevention therapy. She charged about $350 to $400 out of pocket per session, and she had a 7-month wait list. And she wanted to see me, from what I read on her blog, for 20 hours in order to, effectively administer treatment. And, here I was on my own with, thankfully, some support. Kara and her family were very supportive. My family was checking in. They were supportive. But I was similar on my own. I was out of school. I didn't really have much.
Yeah, and not much money either.
Not much money. Didn't have a job. Could hardly even leave my room. At one point, couldn't leave my room. So how was I going to afford that, right? And fortunately, and not only that, how was I also going to get off this wait list for 7 months? Right. And I learned in retrospect that I was lucky. Most people with OCD back in 2014, whenever this was, they would wait for years, not just 7 months. Like the wait list ranged from 7 months to even 5 years at times. And, so I got in on the wait list right away. I was like, I'm just going to start waiting. While I'm waiting, I'm going to try to find a way to cover this treatment. Fortunately, a family member helped step up and really, just did me a huge solid.
Yeah. And
that was what allowed me to start treatment and pay the out-of-pocket fee. Eventually got off the wait list a little bit earlier, which was great. And the therapist was great. She diagnosed me. She said, what you're going through is a Hallmark case. Most people, they don't just get misdiagnosed 6 times. They wait 14 to 17 years just to get into evidence-based treatment because they're just spiraling in the system. And you waited a little bit less time than that, or considerably less time than that. And we can get you better. We can help you really learn how to manage this. And when she said that, I was like, wow, okay, this is one of the best days of my life. And started treatment. It was very difficult, as you know, but nonetheless was able to get through it. Especially, and actually, I'll want to highlight something. It was especially difficult between sessions.
Sure.
Because you see your therapist 1 hour a week, but OCD is 24/7. And that was actually one of the biggest pieces of inspiration for NOCD, because we don't really have a system, or we didn't have a system that could effectively serve someone with OCD, throughout their entire journey. Right? We would help them during sessions, but then when you had to, manage this on your own, you were kind of left on your own between sessions, and that was a big challenge for me, right? So, but nonetheless, got through the treatment, and then fortunately regained my life. Went back to school. Actually came out here in Southern California. I went to Pomona College in East LA, and at that point finished up my degree at Pomona. Finished up playing football, which was a great experience, and realized really well I was at Pomona. And this again, I was thinking about NOCD and thinking about all the ways we can solve this issue. Started building the NOCD platform even at that point. But then there was a moment when I was doing more research, building the platform, I realized OCD isn't necessarily a clinical issue. It's an operational issue, meaning we just haven't done a good enough job as a system at identifying people who have this issue, who have this condition. We haven't done a good enough job then enrolling them into treatment. And the enrollment part's important because that's where people have to have enough trust that they'll actually get better. And they have to also know where to go. So there's a navigation component. And once they're finally enrolled in treatment, we haven't done a good enough job making that treatment effective, affordable, and convenient. It was effective. ERP's always been effective. It just wasn't really affordable and convenient. So how do we fix that? And how do we ensure that people can get the help they need between sessions? So those kind of three components reflect to me an operational gap. And that was the catalyst for really starting the company alongside many other great people here at the company. That's, again, this has truly been, I'm not just saying this too, this has truly been a team effort. I mean, we have people who like yourself who have incredible background clinically. We have people who are some of the top engineers in the entire world. No exaggeration, top 100 engineers in the entire world that are building up our systems. We have people who are building up social media content. So many different people have come together to solve this issue because we know it's, one, personal, but two, it's an ethical issue, right? Why is it that one of the most severe psychiatric conditions has been so misserved when there's effective treatment available? It doesn't make any sense, right? If 1 in 40 people suffer with this. So that's my story, and that's honestly what's driven me is okay, not only are we personally helping people get better, but also we're changing the system and how quality mental health care is delivered.
How'd the name NOCD come about?
Wow. Oh, that's a great question. It honestly took, this is going to sound so bad, but I'm going to say it here.
All right.
It was, I was talking to one of my closest friends, and what are you going to call this company? And he said that to me, and I said, well, it's like saying no to the compulsion disorder. It's not really obsessive. It's not really. If you think about the term OCD,
right,
obsessive compulsive disorder, everyone has obsessions, but it's really the compulsions that drive the fear. So it's really the compulsion disorder. So we're going to say no to the compulsion disorder. Let's just call it NOCD. That conversation lasted 30 seconds.
And that was it.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are,
yeah.
Which is funny because it's the process to name the company was, it took less than 2 minutes for sure.
And you did this in so many amazing ways. You had, if I'm correct, some of your football team members helping out on things. You were at one point living out of the country and working on this as well. This was not just, we're going to sit down, get an office and have a staff and everything. There's some blood, sweat, and tears that went into this.
Oh, there's some wild stories. So I'll go to your first one. So when we were here in Pomona, one of the ways that we would market the NOCD platform, we didn't have any money. One of the ways we would market, we would actually hold these internships on Friday nights, and we would say, okay, well, we want you to cold contact providers who may be treating OCD, because if they're treating OCD, they may refer the NOCD app. At the time, it was just the app. We just had self-help tools, and we had progress tracking in the NOCD platform. We didn't have the therapy component yet.
Was the community there too?
Community wasn't there yet.
Not yet.
At that point.
Okay. All right.
But what we would do is we would go to different providers and we would talk about the platform. So, well, to scale that up, and we didn't have any money, I went to the folks that I played football with, and some of them were amazing in helping. We would get a bunch of Domino's pizzas. We would get a keg of beer. And we had like 70 guys from this football team who are in a dorm room from, let's call it 5 o'clock at night on a Friday to 7:30 at night on a Friday, just emailing therapists in the industry about NOCD, cold contacting personalized emails. And it was great. They had an internship credit. They had free pizza on a Friday night. They were having free beer on a Friday night. And it was just like the most amazing campaign ever. And we ended up reaching, I think it was 25,000 therapists.
Wow.
And just word of mouth started to spread.
Yeah.
So it was a blast too. We had a great time. So it was one of those campaigns that I'll always remember.
So you start with self-help tools. If I remember one story correct, you were featured in Britain on a TV show which crashed the server or something.
Yes, yes. So again, going back to the fact that we didn't have any money, we just guerrilla marketed. Yeah. We had content. What we did, we created social media content, and then we would talk about OCD, raise awareness for it. And this was in, I think, 2015. So Instagram was relatively new at the time. It wasn't like it is today. And we, as a part of that process, people would naturally come to the content and they'd follow us and we'd engage with them. And just was like we had like a little system going, right? It just would create content. And then eventually our follower base grew to like 20,000 people or so. Well, when that happened, we started getting people around the world. It wasn't just in the US.
Right.
And because of the NOCD platform's just, evidence-based nature, therapists would refer it, and they hear about it, and they check it out. They say, "Oh, I'm going to refer this to my client or my patient."
Sure.
And so one day, actually, while I was still here in LA, I actually remember this vividly, was in my dorm room, sound asleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I looked at our numbers, and I saw that our entire platform was down. This happened a number of times. Like, we were just getting started, and I was just looking, I was so upset because I just could not realize why, again, for like the third time our platform went down. And as we started looking into it, we saw that we had this massive, massive surge in traffic and a massive surge of enrollments in terms of new users. And then all of a sudden, everything crashed. And so as we started looking more into it, we realized that those users came from the UK.
Okay.
And so we thought, like, okay, this is something fishy is going on. So we thought we got hacked at one point.
Okay.
And as we looked more into it, we were kind of devastated, but we knew we could fix the problem. So we said, okay, let's go put a notice on social media. And we created a piece of content, and it said, like, servers are down, we're fixing it, we'll be right back up soon. Well, when we did that, we looked at our social media, and we had all these inbox requests saying, "Hey, I just saw you on TV." Oh. And I was like, "TV? I was asleep. What are you talking about?" Yeah. And
someone stuck in your dorm room.
This is getting strange. And sure enough, an incredible OCD specialist clinician in the UK went on the British equivalent of Good Morning America, a show called This Morning, and started talking about the NOCD platform and how helpful it is, and she recommended people to download it and to use it. And again, there are 3 people running NOCD at the time, 2 of which are part-time, 1 of which is still in college, myself. And we're like, how did this happen? So at that point, we realized, wow, if someone on the other side of the world could actually recommend NOCD in this type of way, then we're really onto something. We really need to pursue this. And that became actually one of the driving points of why we kept going early on. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy we did.
When does the community come into play then?
So the community kept coming up after doing research with clinicians. And, I was like, okay, let's test this out. So I started testing it out on social media with our team, and because I wanted to see, like, what did community actually mean to a lot of people with OCD. Like, and in that process, people would connect with others on our threads, and they would basically, tell each other they're not alone. I'm like, great. Well, I didn't really connect it back into the platform just yet at that point. We were in a situation though, when I was, if you fast forward when I was in school, where as we were building the platform out, we saw that engagement for treatment wasn't as great as we would expect it. People said, yeah, I want to do ERP. I want to get better. But when it came time to actually doing the homework, people ended up getting cold feet.
Sure.
And, we couldn't figure out, well, what do we need to do differently to actually improve that situation? At that same time, I was listening to a podcast called How I Built This. And there was an episode with Steve Case, the founder of AOL. And he talked about, well, if you're building great technology, the person-to-person connection is super important, right? And, I was thinking about that more, and I was reflecting back on the whole community concept that we would learn about when I was doing the initial beta testing of NOCD. And so I said, well, look, let's try to ask our members or our users what they want, right? And so we posed the question, if you had a magic wand, you can wave it and fix 3 things about your OCD, what would you fix and why? And they go through the list. And the same 3 things kept coming up about cost, about treatment of access, being able to do ERP, all these things that we knew. But then the light bulb went off, because as we started to see the comments, we saw the engagement between people in the threads.
Sure.
People would like each other's comment. They would comment on the other person's comment. They would just engage in ways that were indescribable. And that's when we're like, oh, wait a second here. What they're telling us is that they want to do treatment more easily, which we already know. What they're showing us is that they want to connect to others like them. And that's when we ended up building the community feed inside NOCD's platform. And that's what ended up allowing us to then get people to come back enough to actually then do their ERP, right? And so that became the glue to treatment adherence for us early on.
Yeah.
We could prove that via data. And then it also became the front door, which is something that I think is a relatively new concept. If you think about the more severe and stigmatized mental health issues, our healthcare system is built today to ask people with severe stigmatized issues to go into it, right? You have to, despite how severe you are, despite how embarrassed you are about your fears, you have to go tell that random stranger you don't know about everything about yourself and your out there thoughts. Well, that's not going to work, right? And so because people don't want to talk about what's really wrong all the time, you have to have trust. So what we realized from building this community is that, in fact, people are willing to use that as the front door, meaning people are willing to tell others like them what's really going on because they feel comfortable, especially if it's in an anonymous way. And so it helped us then, essentially build the trust needed to get someone to take their first steps into treatment. So it made a major impact. And I think in the future, you're going to see a lot more of that for not just NOCD, but other specialty networks that are serving severe and stigmatized mental health populations.
And then in your surveying of people comes across the idea that, can you help us get access to treatment?
Right. Everyone was using NOCD as support between their sessions. That's what it was designed for. We had all this content and all this community, but we didn't actually have therapists. And people would say, hey, it's great you're doing all this, but I still need a therapist. Yeah. And, this was in about 2018. And right as that was happening, we had, the opportunity to do research alongside Dr. Blair Simpson, her team at Columbia University Medical Center, that ultimately showcased how the NOCD platform, as an adjunct to an ERP therapist, not only was as effective as the standard of care, but was also more efficient, meaning people were able to get better faster in less hours. And so when we saw that research and we saw the demands from our community, we realized that now is the time to actually build this out. And we started building NOCD therapy, what it's now known as, in 2018, and we started building the network, starting with one amazing clinician who, to this day, we're still friends with. He's no longer at the company, but he's done wonders, and we're appreciative of him. And he joined the company. We developed incredible trainings thanks to Dr. Stephanie Lonsway and this
Stephanie.
Amazing person sitting next to me here. We ended up then training more providers, and eventually got to a point where people were able to access NOCD therapy inside the NOCD platform in one state. And one fun fact, it almost wasn't NOCD therapy. Like, we had this one service where it was support between more support based, right, in nature. It wasn't actually therapy, but we really wanted to be therapy, and we wanted to be the most effective service possible. And it took a lot of product management and thinking to decide, no, this is going to be face-to-face virtual sessions, and we're going to build out the infrastructure to make it happen in a compliant manner. And that was a very large investment. We had investors call us, say, you think, you all can build this network? Are you sure? Are you nuts? Like this is really hard to do. And we're like, no, we think we can do this. This is what our members need. And fortunately, we followed our intuition. And then 2019 started to take the service from one state. We were just in Michigan to, I believe the second state was California. Mm-hmm. And then the third state was North Carolina. And all that time, we were trying to go to different health insurance companies to pitch,
that's the big part,
right? Yeah. How we can work together. And everyone looked at us and they laughed. They said, OCD is not a problem, right? Or my spouse has OCD. Like it was shocking because I'm like, okay, we personally live this. We know what this is like. It's crippling. How is it that no one sees this, right? It doesn't make any sense. And as we started to just keep going, we realized, wow, there's a need for this. Our community is growing larger and larger. If they just simply saw the healthcare executives across the country, if they saw how important this was, they would actually go forward with it, right? And how are you going to show them that? Well, we ended up then asking our members to just basically anonymously identify that they're a part of their health plan's population or their health system's population. And we ended up having, no exaggeration, tens of thousands of people raise their hand and say, look, I want to participate, and I want to I want to share the fact that I'm a member of health insurance company A. Yeah. And so we did that. And so we started to literally showcase the number of members per population. And we said, look, we have 5,000 people at our door right now looking for help. They don't have an ERP therapist. They're struggling. They need to see one. That's what the research suggests. And dozens of of articles and peer-reviewed journals, right? They all suggest the same thing. Well, why can't we get started? What is it going to take to get started? And when we asked that question, they knowing the demand available, some amazing health plan partners came up to the plate and said, you know what, we're going to figure this out with you. Good. I have a family member who has OCD, who's struggled with this. I know what this is like. I know what those people are going through. Yeah. And so what they did is they helped us build our first model. And then once we started to figure out our model and that we were speaking the same language, then everyone else understood what we really needed. And that's partially on us. Like, again, we didn't have healthcare experience. We had personal experience going through this issue. OCD, we didn't have the deep healthcare knowledge at the time. So it was partially like on us, but we figured it out. And now we have about 140 million Americans who can access NOCD therapy as a covered benefit.
Well, it's an amazing story to watch how something has grown from a personal experience all the way to a company now that treats thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people and has an impact on lives and brings forward a condition that was once a joke or the subject of TV, as in it'll help you solve the crime and it will get you the relationship you wanted. And now people really know the serious nature of it.
I think they're starting to. I think this campaign, this No OCD campaign, is really starting to have monumental impact. We can actually see it, right? People are coming forward and saying, I saw this commercial and I started to research OCD more, and I realized that may be what I'm going through. That may be what my family member is going through. Yep. And I saw your website and I read more about it. I'm like, let me get my first intake. And then fast forward 6 months later, their life is completely changed. Like, we've seen that happen now dozens and dozens and dozens of times. So why that's important is it's important because it shows there is an opportunity to improve the way in which some of these very severe and stigmatized populations can get to treatment from a broad standpoint. But it also shows the importance of getting people with OCD the care that they need early in their journey. It's like, when you do that, you have an incredible group of people who can actually live in a much better way. And think about the gains that come from that. Yep. For themselves, for society, for everything. And so it just shows the importance of just raising awareness. Like, people shouldn't have to suffer, especially if there's treatment for them, right?
Before we go, what is the advice that you would give to someone who's just discovering this might be what's going on? They're just kind of figuring all of this out. They're maybe even seeing this and being inspired. What's your advice to them?
Oh, great question, Patrick. If I was to tell somebody who's just figuring out what they're going through as OCD some advice, what I'd share with them is that, one, they're not alone, but two, they can get better.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people with OCD reflect back on their life before OCD or before their OCD symptoms became super severe. And they say, wow, I wish I had my life back. Yeah. Right? That was what I would do. I would literally reflect back saying, man, a year ago, I was in such a great space, but now I'm like completely tortured by this. Is my life ever going to be the same? And I would doubt it. But what I've realized now is that not only can life be the same or can go back to normal, but it can even be better. Then the key is to get to evidence-based treatment. That's the key. And I say evidence-based because there's a lot of treatments out there for all different types of things. But for OCD, there's a very specific type of therapy called ERP. There also is great research surrounding medication. So this is one of the more treatable chronic conditions, and you can't cure it, but you can manage it over time. And if you access it, you can actually get significantly better, right? It doesn't just happen, but you can get better as time progresses, and your life can not only get to where it once was, but could even be better than it once was. And that's something that I think I would tell someone.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Patrick.
Awesome conversation. Thank you for joining us today at the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you're looking for help with obsessive compulsive disorder or related conditions, check us out at NOCD.com or treatmyocd.com. And please subscribe to our NOCD YouTube channel so that you can get more episodes of this great podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.